Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to Budget 2019. Permit me please from the onset to commend the Minister and the hard-working staff of the Ministry of Finance for yet another orally presentation of the national budget, and to recognize that Budget 2019 is the largest in the history of our country. Surprisingly, there are no billboards around the country to say that. Mr. Speaker, taking Budget 2019 into consideration, it now means that over $1 trillion will be spent by the APNU AFC administration since taking office in 2015. However, Mr. Speaker, are Guyanese better off today after $1 trillion? Have the lives of Guyanese improved after $1 trillion? Are there better infrastructure in our country after $1 trillion? Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member Charanda spoke glowingly about the developments in Region 6 and the glass roads and the lights. But Mr. Speaker, how can you speak glowingly of a region where a government would have closed down the Skeldon Sugar Estate? How can you speak glowingly of a region where the government would have closed down the Rosal Sugar Estate? How can you speak glowingly of a region where the Providence Plantation, the East Bank of Borbies, was closed down? How can you speak glowingly, Mr. Speaker, when the student population at the University of Guyana, the Tain campus, has declined significantly because parents cannot afford to send their children for tertiary education? How can you speak glowingly, Mr. Speaker, about Region 6, when for the past 3 budgets we've been hearing the Minister of Business saying that the Belvedere industrial area is in the incubator stage? How can you speak glowingly, Mr. Speaker, when the ophthalmology, the Port Morant Ophthalmology Hospital is almost closed? How can we speak glowingly, Mr. Speaker, when the rice sector is dying in Borbies because of poor infrastructure, lack of market, and poor prices? Mr. Speaker, this is some of the misinformation that has taken the government to this false sense of comfort, place of comfort. The Honorable John Adams would have mentioned last evening that the David G. buses, the 5Bs program that has replaced the cash grant for students that was implemented under PPC administration, is now providing transportation for all the children in Guyana, for all 187,000 school children in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are 29 David G. buses in the country. And if we should do a simple mathematical calculation, they are mostly 30-seaters, minibus buses. 29 by 30 is 870, Mr. Speaker. 870 out of 187,000 school children in this country, Mr. Speaker. 870. This represents, Mr. Speaker, 0.5%. 0.5% of the school children in this country. We give them a $10,000 cash grant for every single school child in this country. We give them a $10,000 cash grant to every single school child in this country. Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of misinformation that, again, I say, put the government in a false sense of comfort zone. Mr. Speaker, listening to the Honorable Minister of Telecommunication, Ms. Cathy Hughes, I was wondering if the minister is going through her December 2017 speech, because it mirrors almost everything that is in the 2017 speech. Almost everything. It means that nothing happened during 2018. There was nothing new that was reported to this Honorable House that happened in 2018, Mr. Speaker. We heard about the 11th smart classroom. This is good. We have nothing against creating smart classrooms in our country. But what are we doing to arrest the truancy in our country, the school dropouts, the indiscipline, the slow learners, and the declining pass at the grade 6 assessment? These are real issues that need real answers, Mr. Speaker, and that must be dealt with frontally. Mr. Speaker, the minister stopped short to mention about jobs in ICT. ICT should be an area or a sector that would have been creating thousands, if not hundreds of jobs for the youths in Guyana. However, the minister stopped short of mentioning how many jobs were created in 2018 in ICT sector. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, nothing new. Nothing new was presented in the minister's presentation, and I can read from the minister's presentation. I am happy to say that utilizing our e-government network, which the NDMA now manages, has enabled us to provide free internet access to 53 government ministries. That is what the Honorable Minister said earlier in her presentation again, Mr. Speaker. 95 secondary schools, that is what she said earlier. 3 campuses of the University of Guyana, that is what she said earlier. And this was December 2017, Mr. Speaker. December 2017. Mr. Speaker, further. Mr. Speaker, further. And Mr. Speaker, and further, quoting from the Minister December 2017 speech, I want to mention the post offices. The post offices in Guyana, as many of us know it, have been neglected for several decades. This was mentioned again, Mr. Speaker. And to say that we will create hubs, ICT hubs at all the post offices throughout the country, yet the Minister come to this noble house and to say that only New Amsterdam Post Office, a hub was created at the tune of $22 million. In an entire fiscal year, Mr. Speaker, $22 million in capital works has been done by the Telecommunication Ministry. Mr. Speaker, the Minister spoke about internet-ready police cars. But at the same time, post offices are being robbed every day throughout our country. The Minister complained about $30-odd million that was stolen from post offices through robberies. Maybe she's making a plea to the Honorable Minister of Public Security, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that is the right way it should be. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2019, as mentioned, is the largest budget in the history of our country. But I'm still trying to figure out who exactly would benefit from Budget 2019. Well, the fishermen who risk their lives and are fearful of pirate attacks on a daily basis, will they benefit? Will the 7,000 dismissed sugar workers and their families, will they benefit? Will the displaced vendors and the hire car operators outside of this Parliament building benefit, Mr. Speaker? Will the school children benefit? And the answer to these questions, Mr. Speaker, is a resounding no. They will not benefit, Mr. Speaker. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is crafted to benefit, as usual, a selected few and the executive arm of the government, similar to the last 4 budgets, Mr. Speaker. Over $2 billion of this budget, Mr. Speaker, will be spent on the government itself. The money will be spent on dietaries, traveling, charters, security, among others. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, the government will be using $200 billion to execute $100 billion of works. That is what the budget is saying, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2019, Mr. Speaker, was definitely not designed to benefit the ordinary citizen of this country. Budget 2019 was not designed to arrest the failing productive sectors and the ailing economy. Budget 2019 was not designed to reduce the escalating cost of living. Budget 2019, Mr. Speaker, was not designed to encourage investments and job creations. Budget 2019 was not designed to increase manufacturing and exports. Budget 2019, Mr. Speaker, was designed to benefit the government of Guyana and not the people of Guyana. A quick look at the measures, Mr. Speaker, a quick look at the measures of Budget 2019 will show that the budget indicated a 5,000 increase in the threshold. But with the increasing cost of living, it is a mere drop in the ocean. And the Honorable Member Carrington mentioned last night in his presentation that when pay increases, price increases. But we want to say to the Honorable Member that prices would have increased a long time ago. Prices would have increased a long time ago. And it is the failure of the government, Mr. Speaker, and the stubbornness of the government to reduce or to take off the excise tax on fuel so that people can pay less than $200 for a liter of fuel. And we know that everything revolves or hinges around fuel, Mr. Speaker. From sending your children to school, from putting food on the table, from the vegetables in the market, it revolves around fuel. So, Mr. Speaker, the 5,000 is just a mere drop in the ocean. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the 5-year period to renew your driver's license at a $5,000 cost. This is as a result of the government trying to lower costs again, Mr. Speaker. This is an enforced measure that was put in the budget because obviously the new driver's license will cost more to reproduce on a 3-year period. So it is a forced measure that was included in 2019, Mr. Speaker. The 10,046 pages passport. Mr. Speaker, how many Guyanese will benefit from this? Today, Guyanese are struggling to buy a ticket. They cannot travel if their families don't purchase a ticket for them, Mr. Speaker. Concessions on hybrid vehicle and electric motorcycles, and I'm happy that the Honorable Minister of Infrastructure with responsibility for electricity is speaking, because we are still grappling with giving electricity to households and businesses. Then we are bringing electric motorcycles and electric cars, Mr. Speaker. What will happen with our people on the road? Mr. Speaker, reduction in the replacement of tin certificate from 5,000 to 2,000. This is a correction of the APNU AFC government. They implemented this, Mr. Speaker. This is rectifying their own mistake. Mr. Speaker, concession for people with disabilities. This is very commendable. This is very commendable, Mr. Speaker. But how many physically challenged people can afford to buy these specially designed vehicles? How many persons with physical disability can do so, Mr. Speaker? Further, this scheme must be managed properly. Mr. Speaker, further, we warn that this scheme must be managed properly because it can be an avenue for corruption and misuse. Mr. Speaker, VAT-free prosthetic arms, legs, and teeth. How many persons will benefit from this again, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the government did a survey and have the figures, but I don't see many one-hand, one-foot, no-teeth people running around the country. So yet again, it is a measure that will not benefit every single Guyanese. Why not set up a fund that can help these people, Mr. Speaker, because this is a very small section of our population we are talking about. This is a very, very small section of our population who can hardly afford. If they could have afforded it, Mr. Speaker, they would have had a leg on an arm today. Mr. Speaker, those are some of the measures in Budget 2019. And there is no indication that this budget will improve the economic, social, and physical state of this country. With that being said, you can clearly understand why 62% of the people of this country rejected the APNU and the AFC on November 12, 2018 at the local government elections, and will do so even more resoundingly, Mr. Speaker, come 2020. Further, Mr. Speaker, the 300.7 billion represents an increase of almost 20 billion in current expenditures, meaning more travel, more security, more dietary, more charters, more wasted, while there's a meager increase of 2.4 billion or 6% of capital expenditures, which should have been intended to benefit people and their communities, Mr. Speaker. But instead, if you look at the capital estimates, a significant amount of the capital estimates, Mr. Speaker, will be spent on studies, will be spent on design, will be spent on proposals, will be spent on vehicles for administration, will be spent on government buildings and fences. Yes, Mr. Speaker, fences. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because a quick glance through the capital estimates of Budget 2019 will point to the misuse, mismanagement, and the lack of vision of sending down tangible benefits to our people. Mr. Speaker, Budget 29 allocates to the Ministry of Presidency alone almost $150 million for motor vehicles. $150 million, Mr. Speaker, for motor vehicles alone. Over $500 million for buildings. Over $500 million, Mr. Speaker, for buildings alone, wiring building and painting building. And another whopping $350 million will be spent on the preparation for a Jubilee celebration, Mr. Speaker. On the preparation for a Jubilee celebration. And we can only imagine how much it will cost us for the celebration come 2020, Mr. Speaker, if this is only the preparation. Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Honorable Gillian Borton, would have mentioned areas that this money could have been spent on. It could have been spent, for example, we have imposed VAT on light and water. Why not reduce that? We still owe sugar workers severance pay. Why not pay them that? There are people who are crying out for jobs in our country. For every single corner of our country, people are crying out for jobs, Mr. Speaker. Why not create investments that jobs will be created for our young people. And yet the government, Mr. Speaker, cannot listen to the cries of the people. Further, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will spend $46.6 million on motor vehicles in 2019. The Office of the Prime Minister will spend $18 million. The Ministry of Finance will spend $24 million. The Ministry of Indigenous Affairs will spend $64.7 million. The Ministry of Natural Resources will spend $10 million. The Ministry of Education will spend $79.2 million. The Ministry of Social Protection will spend $53.6 million. The Ministry of Public Health will spend $31 million. The Ministry of Public Security will spend $86.9 million on vehicles, Mr. Speaker.
I remember you have 5 minutes remaining.
On vehicles, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it means that the government will spend in 2019 over almost $700 million in vehicles alone. $700 million, Mr. Speaker. This is more than any of the 10 region capital budgets. Any of the regional capital budget, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if we should go further, there is $110 million allocated for government buildings and fences, Mr. Speaker. There must be some obsession with fences. $134 million for the highway, Linden Highway feasibility study. Mr. Speaker, and the studies don't stop there. According to the Minister, feasibility study for the Linden-Mabura Road, the Kurukupari Crossing, the Letham Airport upgrade, the Puri-Castellin, the modernization of the Georgetown Port, among many others, will occur in 2019. These are all studies, Mr. Speaker. These are not projects. These are not money that will be spent to do physical projects. These are studies. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2019 has an allocation of $100 million for a monument in Linden. Let's hope it's not a replica of the Madhya monument. Mr. Speaker, in my humble view, and in full respect of all members of this honorable house, I personally don't believe that arches and monuments bring direct benefits to people. Mr. Speaker, my friend, the Honorable Rutherford, went through a long list of projects in Region 10, but not one time did he mention the 100 million monument. Maybe he shared the same view as I do, or was not consulted. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure if we conduct a quick survey in Linden, majority of the residents will agree with me that they prefer the money to be spent on the roads and investments and in job creation so that their families and their children could enjoy a good life that was promised to them by the government. Mr. Speaker, this shows clearly that the government definitely has its priorities mixed up, which resulted in wasteful and extravagant spending because of no consultation and consideration for the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, there are much talks about youths and youth empowerment, youth entrepreneurship, youth employment, yet the National Youth Strategy is sitting at the Ministry of Social Cohesion since October 2016. Yet there is no allocation for the Youth Innovation Fund, yet there is no creation of jobs for young people.
I'll remember you have 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, taking into consideration that the coalition government would have lost 2 consecutive local government elections and is facing a no-confidence motion, we'd have expected that there would have been more investment and job creation for the Guyanese people. That VAT would have been removed from school supplies, light, water, agriculture and mining equipment, drugs and medical supplies, among other items that were zero-rated. That we would have introduced the light and water subsidy to pension. That we would have reintroduced the $10,000 cash grant to our school children. That we would have incentivized and not to penalize the agriculture and mining sector. And of course, Mr. Speaker, prioritize government spendings. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we in the opposition and all Guyanese call on the government to govern for all Guyanese as promised in your manifesto. Prioritize government spending and ensure that tangible benefits can be secured. Attract real investments that will create jobs and wealth for Guyanese. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.